Welcome to UPThinking Finance, a podcast that offers a unique and discerning view of economics and financial planning. Here is your host, Emerson Fersch.
Welcome to another episode of UPThinking Finance. French statesman Charles de Gaulle once said, "No nation has friends, only interests." It's my pleasure today to welcome back Tom Luongo. He's a former research chemist and part-time goat farmer. He publishes the Gold, Goats, and Guns blog, a monthly newsletter, and also records a podcast. His work is also published in Bitcoin Magazine and syndicated regularly on such sites as ZeroHedge, LouRockwell.com, and Investing.com. Gold, Goats, and Guns can be found on Patreon. Tom's an interesting man. He first came on the show probably, almost 2 years ago now. And he has a very unique way of connecting geopolitical dots. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation this morning. Tom Luongo coming to us from the beautiful Sunshine State. Tom, good to see you again. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks, Emerson. More than welcome to do so.
So I mentioned in my intro briefly just about how you have an ability to really connect dots in a very unique way geopolitically. And I thought your last two essays, I've enjoyed your writing since I've been a subscriber now, probably for a couple of years, but the last two not only were timely, just really seemed inspired. And so I wanted to ask you to maybe walk through these two. The first one was in the May issue of Gold, Goats, and Guns, which, as I mentioned, can be found on Patreon, called Spiraling Towards the End Game. And I think just to set this up for where you kind of took me, really explained it to a different direction, is that I think there's an element of a lot of people, including myself up until recently, that expect, everybody has their interests. They're locked into their positions, and A should go to B and B should go to C. And you completely blew that out of the water, and it made complete sense. And you started with this comparison to a game called Shadowfist. So maybe we can start there, and let's just see where this leads.
If I know we were going to go there this morning, to be honest with you, I would have brought some cards and been like, no, seriously, dude, cyborg monkey tanks. It's hilarious. So Shadowfist is a now dead collectible card game like Magic the Gathering or Pokemon and whatnot. It came out back in the mid 90s. It hit like a lead balloon because it wasn't particularly well play tested. It was actually but it was a brilliant multiplayer game. It was a terrible 2-player game. But what it also did was it had this vibe about it. It was like, okay, what if every conspiracy theory were true? So this is like the setup for the game, right? This is the world they built. What if every conspiracy theory is true across every, Chinese hopping vampires from the 14th century, all the way to, architects, the vivisectionists from the future that want to try and do retroactive abortions on the past. This is the whole thing, right? So it gave the designers and they're from a whole, I'm a big fan of very, very boutique role-playing games because I've been doing them my entire life, not D&D and Pathfinder and stuff like that, but really small box stuff with independent game designers. And there's a whole world that exists within that space. If you know those people, what their ethos is, right? And these are the same people that created Over the Edge and the role-playing game based on Shadowfist, Feng Shui, and all this. I can go into an entire hour-long history on this stuff because it's fascinating. But what they did was they also, in doing so, they had this milieu, and then they said, well, it's all one big conspiracy, and it's a big Hong Kong action movie. Now let's set this up as if it's a big, just over-the-top, crazy Hong Kong action movie. 7 different factions all fighting amongst themselves, and completely, when you look at it from a game design perspective, it was groundbreaking because it was almost anarchic game structure where in most of these games, I'm going to attack this space over here, I'm going to attack you, I've got these assets and I'm going to go attack you over here, and he's going to attack somebody else over there, and there's not any real way for in other players to get involved in those things. And 9 times out of 10, they don't even want to. But in Shadowfist, because it was a game that was best played in a kind of de minimis state. And what I mean by that is because you've got enough resources and in the form of cards and or power tokens or whatever you want to call them, that you could continually, the best way to play the game was to beat everybody and keep them gasping on the edge of collapse, right? Because the game quickly moved from, oh, we're just starting our opening gambit to, oh my God, we're now fighting for and it's this massive extended mid game, right? where you sit in this, if you amongst highly skilled players, you sat in this highly anxious mid game forever and a day. I mean, we used to play 3-hour games of Shadowfist, or 5 players, and we would just like beat each other over and over and over again, constantly trying to keep the other guy from winning, but at the same time keeping the board just balanced enough. This is where the geopolitics comes in, just balanced enough that when, quote unquote, that attack was over, that threat was over, no one else was, not only the good players, not only was the attack stymied, but everybody else expended maximum resources doing so, and they were not going to be able to then immediately make a counter move to go for the win. Everybody was kind of in a constant state of rebuilding and a constant state of having to play offense and defense at the same time. And so, no lie here, not pat myself on the back, but I was really good at this. And I was really good at talking the board. I was really good at the game, being able to read my hand of cards, look at my power pool, look at the state of the board, look at the range of assets that everybody had at the table, and go do all that Bayesian statistics in my head, and then go, okay, here's the firing solution. Can I win this turn? I draw my hand of cards every round and go, can I win this turn? This would start on turn 3. The game would go 15, 18 turns, but every round it was the same thing. Can I win this turn? Nope. Okay, now what do I do? And how do I beat these guys now? Who is trying to win this turn? And then there's the politicking that went on around the table. And what you realize is that you become a really good diplomat, where you explain to people who may not be as sharp as you are as to what's going on. Like, oh, by the way, you can't attack him, because if you do that, that's going to lead to this, which is going to lead to this, which is going to lead to that. Oh, Jesus. Which is going to lead to that, and that would be bad, and he's going to win. What you invariably did was then you talk the board in such a way that you said, look, this is your optimal play, right? Which is also my optimal play. That's the magic, right? The magic is, you need to do this, because if you don't do this, if you don't do this, he's going to win. So you have to do this, or he's going to, he's not going to win, but the guy kind of, and after him is going to win. And I'm always sitting there thinking, how do I make this game last long enough to get to my next turn, so that I can look at my hand and go, can I win? Right. And you did this, and you manipulated people in every way, manner, shape, and form at the table, but you were never giving them bad advice. It was the essence of good diplomacy. You were telling them the truth. And this is all we did. And we built decks, and we played Shadowfist, and we went to work, and we came home. That's literally like 90% of our lives. And then we were all friends and everything else. But it was just this, and it was this immense, like, I didn't realize at the time, but you were teaching yourself like how to read multivariable problems and see them, and just see solutions to them all the time, and just assess everybody else's point, because you always had to look the board up. Okay, what is he trying to do? What is he trying to do? What's his thing? What's, what factions is he playing, and what deck is he likely playing, and blah, 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 blah. And there's all this metagame stuff that was going on. And geopolitics is nothing but a big metagame. Once you understand the personnel, once you understand the history of each of the countries, once you understand each of the, once you understand the perspective of the factions that are in play, well, then it makes, this is, and in common parlance, this is called understanding history. And so this is why those last 2 articles that you talked about, I think were so successful, was because my partner, the historian, Dexter White, sat on my shoulder going, dude, you have to present this differently. I know what you're trying to do, but you're falling into the classic trap of all like kind of first year historians, which is that there's a linear narrative that I'm going to tell everybody. Here's the story. And it doesn't work that way. Yeah. History is a bunch of shit people did. And then we call it history. And you have to remind yourself of that. I'm like, I see what you're trying to do, but you're not being successful here. So let's rejigger this. And he's never sent articles back to me after the first draft as hard as he has over the last 2. And I'm not, and that's not a rebuke. It was the right thing to do, because I was trying to do things where I didn't have the skill as a writer and as a thinker, because I wasn't trained as a historian. I'm trained as a scientist.
Yeah.
Set up boundary conditions,
right.
Solve the boundary conditions, show the story. It may not be true, but here's your story. And then, oh, you want to tell that you want to tell that same story next week? Fine, reset the boundary conditions to something slightly different and tell a new story. That's the way I operate. I operate in a very compartmentalized way, and it sometimes drives my wife nuts because it comes across as being like bullying, and I know it comes across that sometimes my detractors on YouTube and whatnot see the same thing. I'm like, no, guys, I'm just running a story. This is the way I operate because this is the way I've been trained, and I'm really good at it. Okay, that doesn't mean I believe anything that just came out of my mouth, because I can do that. So, all right. So when you sit down and you play the game of Shadowfist, invariably, after all this time, the best games lasted forever as everybody tried to hold everything in amber, hold everything in a very tight, metastable state. But then somebody would make a move, and then the whole thing would start to collapse.
Kind of like Jenga.
Right. No, it is exactly like a Jenga tower. Or, the best way to describe it would be a supersaturated solution of water with a salt in it. That you can do this with certain salts. You can't do it with table salt, but you can do it with other salts, where you can heat the water solution up and dump a whole bunch of I don't know, barium sulfate. It's not barium sulfate, but whatever, calcium sulfate or whatever. There's some of them out that you can do this with. You can heat the solution up, dump a whole bunch in, and it'll all dissolve, because at an elevated temperature, right, solvation of salts goes up just because there's more collisions, and it's just physics. But then when the solution cools down, you don't get the precipitation. The excess doesn't precipitate out because of the very, very tense structure within the crystal structure of the liquid. Everything is held there. But then if you just like ping the side of the beaker with your finger, the whole thing collapses and everything precipitates out of solution. So that's actually a better metaphor, I think, than anything else, and that's called super saturation. You can look that up online. A saturated solution is where you can't add any more, and then the more you add, it won't go into solution, and it just the stuff sits at the bottom. You add more water, and now you can add more stuff. But some allow you to super saturate depending on the temperature, and then they'll hold that as long as you don't disturb it in some. Usually, it's a physical way.
But the whole thing sounds very fragile.
It is. It's very fragile. Or I like to use the word brittle. I think brittle is a more descriptive way, because fragile, we start getting into Nassim Taleb and all this other stuff. Let's use a different word. Not that there's anything wrong with
No, I get it.
Taleb's idea of anti-fragility. I just want to keep the connotations separate, right?
Well, so to the history point, you then went into you went back to Syria through COVID to Kiev, and it was kind of a nice snapshot of fairly recent history that's kind of led us to today. Can I get you to walk through that a little bit?
Sure. So what I did in the article, when I set up that metaphor for, okay, we're spiraling towards endgame, I said, this is my version of the last 10 years of history, starting with Obama's attempted invasion of Syria, because this is when I became a geopolitical analyst, right? This is the day that when British Parliament stood up and defied David Cameron about going into Syria along with Barack Obama. That's when everything changed. That's when I said, oh my God, what's going on here? And that actually in that moment led to Brexit. It led to so many other things. Yeah. Right. Obama attempts to invade Syria in 2013 as part of the Arab Spring, as opposed to the setup with Arab Spring and all the stuff that Hillary Clinton did and everything else. So, and what's the goal in Syria? Well, the goal in Syria is one of the goals, and again, this is how you sell Syria. Everybody has an agenda in Syria, but what is their agenda? Well, they're all different. Everybody has to get their gives. Well, the Saudis wanted a pipeline for their natural gas through Syria into Turkey. So did Iraq. So did Kuwait. So did the UAE. So did Qatar, right? They all wanted that. At the same time, what did Turkey want? Turkey wanted to become the gas hub and the energy crossroads for the entire Middle East to Eurasia and into Europe. This is all a big power play by Europe to get cheap energy. So me mapping Barack Obama to what I call Davos is accurate, going all the way back to 2009. The Brits refused to go in. Putin eventually steps in. He comes in and they set up the invasion of Syria with the chemical gas attack at Ghouta. Putin steps in, brokers a deal that Assad will give up all of his chemical weapons and don't invade. But that only happens because the British refuse to go in with the Americans. Okay. Which is a very weird moment. In my world, Putin's reward for stopping World War III was the Maidan. At the same time, all this was happening, the EU was trying to pull Ukraine into its orbit. They had signed an accession agreement, a trade agreement, a terrible deal for Ukraine. I mean, any Ukrainian listening to my voice now, go back and look at that deal. Then go back and look at the deal that Yanukovych signed with Putin. You tell me which was the better deal. Clearly, the Putin deal was better, and that's why Yanukovych took it. But George Soros and Victoria Nuland and John McCain had their sights set on Ukraine. The same people, that are running this operation today and running the Biden junta. It's continuation of the same policy with a 4-year interregnum under Trump. So the Maidan starts. It's clearly a thing that's out of control. That's going to spiral out of control. By February, right after the Olympics in Sochi are over, we put snipers on the rooftops and the Maidan and blah 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 blah, and then the violent overthrow of Viktor Yanukovych, which, as far as the Russians are concerned, is an illegal and illegitimate coup, and they haven't had a legitimate government in Kiev in 10 years. Right? That leads to Crimea. That leads to the sanctions. That leads to the Americans telling, and the Canadians and the British telling the Ukrainians to quash the rebellion in the Donbass. The Donbass civil war starts. The DPR and the LPR fight the Ukrainians to a standstill, albeit with a lot of Russian help. But the Ukrainians were getting a lot of American, British, and Canadian help. Then there's MH17. Then there's this. Then there's that, and it keeps going. Eventually, we get to the Minsk agreements. The EU passes the third energy package, which Putin cancels the South Stream pipeline, repurposes the Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream. Germany is still playing snake in the NATO garden like they always have. And this keeps going on and on and on. And so we keep moving forward in time. Trump is elected. There's the JCPOA is signed in 2015. France starts to make investments into Iran, Total, North Pars gas field deal, all of that stuff. Like, you can see the strategy is now laying itself out. So it just keeps happening, keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. And I could take this for another 20 minutes all the way up to the present. But the reality is that all of these things are downstream of each other. And everybody's interests have aligned until we get to the moment where Putin invades Ukraine in February of 2022. Between Minsk and Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream and the JCPOA and all of this stuff. This leads to the BRICS. It leads to, in anticipation of all of this, Russia signed the Power of Siberia contract with the Chinese in order to make sure that he had a market for his gas, because he knew he was going to get sanctioned over Crimea. So, all of this stuff it's all like right there. And then we bomb the price of oil in 2015. Russia has to change its, the way it now has to start de-dollarizing, and it Eurofies. It changes out all of its debt from dollar-denominated debt to euro-denominated debt. This is why Nord Stream was financed the way it was. You can go look all that stuff up. And I've covered all this like in grave detail as it was happening. And that has led to that moment where Zelensky goes to the Munich Security Conference along with Kamala Harris, and they say, yep, not only is Ukraine going to become a member of NATO, but we're going to give them nuclear weapons with a couple 100,000 Russian troops on the border. What do you think is going to happen next?
Right.
Well, they were expecting Putin, because they thought they had a psychological profile on Putin, that he would never actually make that move, because he's always deferred and demurred from any direct conflict with NATO.
Yeah.
That he's always walked away from. He's always figured out a way to do a parallel aggression thing. Like they blow up one of his Eland planes. He wipes out a bunch of British SAS. Like that's been the trade-off over the years. Or they blow up a bunch of blow up a bunch of Russian Spetsnaz. Fine. Somehow, there's there are ships running into each other in the South China Sea, like that kind of thing, right? So, none of these things are unrelated. So, when you get to February of 2022, they never expected Putin to go first. They expected to be able to launch a first strike against the Donbass and force Putin onto his back foot. And of course, being the old martial artist that he is, he was like, you know what? Nope, going first.
Yeah.
Because in any fight that's inevitable, it does not behoove you to go second. You want to win, you want to score that point in the martial arts tournament, you want to win that sparring match, you go first. Yeah, I don't care. You talk to fighters, you talk to martial artists, you talk to MMA guys, they all say the same thing. When you see the opportunity, you take it and you go, and you set him up to go first. And that's what Putin did. And from there, it's all been a spiral towards where we are today, which is now all the sanctions regimes have failed. The Magnitsky, the birthright of the Magnitsky Act, and all of this shit, all falling apart. The Russian economy is now far stronger than it ever was. Yes, it's reoriented along the lines of building out a big war machine, but it's not like the Russian economy was ever the epitome of private formation of capital or anything. Like, it's always been a kind of quasi centrally planned economy, even under Putin. And that's kind of the way the Russians like it, at least this crop of Russians. And they seem to do very well in that environment. And 50 years from now, they may be more quote unquote entrepreneurially minded or whatever. But as of right now, they're used to living under this kind of Putin's kind of gangsta state style government, and they're okay with it. Otherwise, they wouldn't keep giving him 90% of the freaking vote.
Right. This is really important where this history you gave, because you made a point in the essay, which I really, really thought was exceptional. And you said, for the outside person that's not digging into this stuff the way you do and is reading headlines on, a line or in a newspaper, you said that there's entanglement seems to create some sort of sense of equilibrium, I think is the word you used. But underneath it all, and this explains the game, is that the tight, the more this rubber band, and that's my metaphor, stretched out, you realize that there's an element of escalation. Somebody gets forced to make the move, like you said, that isn't anticipated, and that was the invasion by Russia.
I think it really is. And you're right. It can feel very much like we're at a kind of stasis, and geopolitics always looks like a kind of move, counter move, move, counter move, move, counter move, move, counter move. You don't know what that looks like. I urge you to try playing a game called Twilight Struggle, which is literally the Cold War. Yeah, which is literally Cold War in the box.
Yeah.
The GMT game, and they make incredible historical simulation games, and one of their finest is Twilight Struggle. It's a 2-player game. One plays the United States, one plays the Soviet Union. You're trying to win the Cold War.
There you go. Let me ask you 2 questions before we jump, because that part of it really springboards into the next essay you wrote. This idea that there's a forced shift. But 2 thoughts came to mind. One is there somebody who represents the Tom Luongo, the guy who's kind of ahead in today's, if you look at all the leaders, because you wrote in that essay too, you talked about Blinken and Newland, they're operating as if everything, their choice is to stay with the past, not change, pretend like everything's the same. Right. So that's one question. But the other one too, is I was thinking as you're describing this, is at the end, does the long-term purpose shift? Because it seems to me at the end, you're still trying to get to Z, let's say, right? And yet all these things are shifting, very dramatically. Is there, when you described it with these, this sort of I forget the word you used, but these boundaries you set.
Right.
Boundary conditions. Yeah. Is there still some big, are we still operating within some kind of,
what you're actually describing is quantum tunneling.
Okay.
I hate to keep like shifting here, but like, dude, now that you're saying, I'm like, yeah, well, here's the boundary conditions of the problem, or here's the box that we're in. And the first thing you'll learn in quantum mechanics is that when you solve for the particle in a box, you realize that there are probabilities where the particle is outside the box, but the box is the universe. Okay. The box is the universe. And yet somehow you can solve the Hamiltonian operator for the Schrodinger equation, and you can wind up outside the box. That's like the first lesson you learn in the first lecture in quantum mechanics, because you're building models of the universe. You start with a particle in a box, then you do a 2D, then you do a 2-body problem, then you do a 3-body problem, and then and literally the first lesson in any quantum mechanics is the particle in the box thing. So what you're saying is, here are our boundary conditions. Are we getting, is there a bigger universe than the one we think there is? Absolutely. Ukraine is not the entire story, right? There's other aspects of this. So Newland, Blinken, Samantha Power, all these people are all focused on Ukraine, and Ursula von der Leyen and the rest of them are focused on Ukraine because they think through Ukraine is the path to everything else. We have to take out Ukraine. We have to defend Ukraine because that takes out Russia. We take out Russia, we get this. If this, then this. If this, then this. If this, then that.
Right.
That's their spiral. That's their only path to endgame. So they keep beating themselves against the boundary conditions. I have a great Shadowfist story that no one will understand as I think about it now, how I lost the world championships in 2006 or whatever it was when I went to Gen Con. I had my type of play style met up against a different type of play style that was completely incompatible with the way I played. But he was the only one at the table doing it, and it worked brilliantly. Everybody else was the weaker player. They didn't know what to do. All I did was hand him the game because I didn't know how to deal with his style of play. He basically played with huge sites that I wasn't able to do enough damage in one go to trigger the things that needed to be triggered. And the Shadowfist is, you don't damage a site, you take the site. If you can't take the site, don't attack the site, because sites are how you win the game, right? So if you mortally wound a site, then you just leave it for somebody else to take, and it's easy. So I wound up handing the game to somebody else. And in a sense, that's what Putin's done. He's built what we would call a New York deck, whole bunches of twin towers, big body sites, and then you can almost argue that I'm like NATO doing maneuver style warfare against Iraq. That a wall with no features in it that you can get around. In a sense, that's kind of what he's doing by him doing a trench warfare, World War I style a trench war of attrition in Ukraine, both financially, culturally, politically, and militarily. He's literally just put up a wall and said, I don't need to win this war. All I need to do is not lose it, because if you don't win, you lose. Whereas Newland and Blinken and everybody understand this, and they need to take him down. They just think that wall is finite. They think it's 6 inches thick, and it's not. It's like 12 feet thick. And they've run out of ammunition to burn through the wall, and now they're 4 or 5 feet through the wall, but they can't get through the last 7 feet because they need 10 years to rebuild their ammo stores to be able to do this. And in the meantime, he's going to build, another 25 feet thick worth of walls. Like, it's a losing proposition over and over and over again. So
would you say, I mean, I'm not putting words in your mouth, I'm asking the question, is Putin really at this point, winning the game, if that's a way to say it at this point?
Yeah, he is. He's winning the game through attrition. And it's a very valid strategy. I mean, I will be honest with you. I know you'll be shocked to hear this, Aaron. I played a hyper aggressive type of game. I played an all or nothing strategy.
You seem so passive, Tom.
Yeah, I know. I'm just like, but the funny part about it is that whenever I played rope-a-dope with people, they're like, what the hell is Tom doing? How is he playing that? And I could actually shift modes. I actually had 2 favorite decks of mine. One was hyper aggressive and one was much more control. I actually also like, if you're a Magic player, I like to play blue, which is all, no, you're not allowed to do this. What we call permission. No. Yeah, I want to do this. No, you don't. No, stop. Counterspell this, that. No, stop. No, I'm summoning this big demon. No, you're not. I'm going to put down this thing that makes me win the game and lock you out of the game. No, you're not. Like, I have both parts of that personality in my play style. I can play either of those games very, very adeptly, right? So I can understand what Putin's doing, and I can understand what Blinken, because I can see the two play styles, because you have to be able to shift with the meta. You have to, and you also have to feed and to be honest with you, as just a game player, you have to feed your soul playing different types of games in order to not get bored. Because
Right.
if if you're just playing the same thing over and over again, like, oh, we do this, I win. Oh, you won. Oh, wow, that was fun. Can we play something different, please?
Let me ask you this, because this
Mhm.
concept, this idea then leads into the next essay, which was Welcome to Splitsville. And that was the June article again, which was exceptional. And your primary, at least for me, you postulate this idea that the U.S. is beginning to separate from old Europe, which I'm assuming is England, France, Italy, Germany, like
Mhm.
that. But it also ties to another point, and I'm just throwing this out there because I'm at, which has been Powell's goal with
Mhm.
FOMAC and all these interest rate decisions, because you've been pretty consistent to a theory. And I think that whole process for me illustrates what you've been talking about, because,
Mhm.
we've been following, everybody's hyper focused on the Fed. I mean, that is literally driving markets, it seems, for the last 2 years.
That's right.
And getting to our friend Alex Craner, I use a trend following model where clients of his, and it's been frustrating as
Mhm.
hell because there's been no trend other than equity markets
Right.
getting up. But your point has been that effectively Powell's goal, and I'm really simplifying something complicated,
Sure.
has been to kill the euro, eventually to force Europe into decisions. And then you get into some other economists we follow over there. They're basically arguing economically that the cracks are there and the UU is actually falling apart.
Mhm.
So my point is, I'd love you to just touch on how these decisions that are happening, Putin's decisions, let's say, this whole Ukraine thing is starting to divide, and I guess this brittle structure that you said is starting to fall apart. Let's go there.
Always thought it this way. I wrote about it on the publicly for the Gold, Goods, and Guns blog. I said, Putin's goal here is attrition. He understands that it's all a race. It's a race to the bottom. All he has to do is stand still and let them break themselves on him, and they're going to spend trillions, and he's going to spend billions, and that's how you beat you. In an art, I don't remember which article it was. I wish I could remember now. I should have wrote it with me, but I brought it with me. But it's how do you beat an opponent? How do you beat a vastly superior opponent, one who has more? And I talk in terms of resources, everything: more money, more people, more power, more weapons, arguably more weapons, more ships, more volume. How do you beat that? How do you beat that person? You run a war of attrition against them, where you spend very little and they have to spend a lot.
Mm.
And then you make them keep thinking that they can win. Have you ever played Risk? Everybody's played Risk,
Yeah.
right? And everybody who has ever tried to attack Ukraine or the Middle East in Risk knows exactly how this works. You dump a whole bunch to defend Europe, you dump a whole bunch of stuff into Ukraine. It's a one front war. And the Asian player has to attack from 3 or 4 different angles in order to try and break down Ukraine. And, and people who are bad at math keep rolling dice, hoping that they can roll more sixes than the other guy. And it doesn't work when ties go to the defender. And so Risk models the war of attrition across multiple layers of just run that as a metaphor across every other domain. And you understand that what Putin's been doing is saying, as I've said many times in many interviews, it's like that scene in the movie for Return of the Living Dead, the 1985 parody of the Romero movies, where the zombies attack the kids having the gothlings having sex in the graveyard, and then the zombies take over. Then the cops show up. The zombies eat the cops. The zombie gets behind the wheel of the cop car, picks up the radio, and goes, "Send more cops." And it's hilarious. It's like the only thing I remember from that movie. Like, send more cops, because it literally is hilarious. And that's what Putin's been doing. This has been send more cops over and over and over again.
Mm.
And Newland and Blinken and company cannot see that the wall they're trying to break down is beyond their capacity to do so. They have deluded themselves through an echo chamber, through institutional bureaucracy, institutional inertia. When you stop to think about the way, and I've written about this and I've talked about this in the past as well, when you start really thinking about what our alphabet agencies look like, if they set the agenda at the top that we're going to war with Russia in the State Department, for example, or the CIA or wherever, then everybody down that ladder is going to implement that policy. And honest analysts at the bottom of the chain doing the actual field. Not that we do field work, but let's just assume that there's 3 people left at the State Department who actually do field work and go, these numbers aren't going to work. We need this. I need to let my superior know. And the superior goes, nobody above me wants to hear this. What are you crazy? I can't send this up. I'll get fired or I'll get reprimanded, and then I won't get my promotion, and I won't get my, I won't get my gold watch and the GI Joe with the Kung Fu grip and all the rest of it. I won't get my cookie. Therefore, it doesn't go anywhere. And so the only information that filters up to the top is the exact information that people like Nuland and Blinken want to hear. We can beat Russia. Okay, they keep doing it. We can beat Russia. You think von der Leyen is getting good information out of whatever structures exist within the EU? No, she's not. This is the woman who, single-handedly, disarmed the Bundeswehr, right? She was the worst defense minister in Germany's history. And then she was promoted to, EU Commission president. Why? Because they want the Americans to do it. They don't want to do it. They want the Americans to do it. That's what Putin's doing. And then Putin understands what Powell is doing. He understands this completely. They're making moves to separate themselves from the dollar system. Powell is raising the cost of dollars on the rest of the world. His job, make sure that everybody who needs dollars outside of the United States pays through the nose for his oil and his gas and his titanium and his tungsten and his wheat and his iron ore and his timber and his coal and his uranium and blah, 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 like standard work units and all of this. That's what he's doing. It's not tough. He understands that. And it's going to be, as Zoltan Poes are, your commodities, our problem, or our commodities, your problem, as opposed to our money, your problem scenario.
And that seems to be, and again, I love the going back to the game, because that just it's a very understandable foundation here to compare to. But it does seem, and this is just me in real simple layman's terms, it seems like we're getting to an every man for himself kind of moment here.
Sure.
Even Macron, and this indulges a point that you made in this other essay, but he gave a talk. It's, I don't know, is it Sorbonne? Is that how you pronounce it? I don't know. But anyway, okay. And he basically talks about, the future of Europe and the future of France being inextricably linked. And then he talks about America, and he says, United States has 2 priorities: America first, which is legitimate, and China. And then he basically says Europe is not a geopolitical priority in the coming years and decades. And then he makes the comment, which I think is really interesting. He talks about one of the reasons, or several reasons, why Europe can die. And one of them is because he says every year our savings, amounting to around 300 billion euros a year, goes to finance the Americans, whether we look at treasury bills or capital risk. This is absurd. So that's clear evidence there's this breaking away that's happening.
Macron is upset about the fact that they buy $300 billion worth of treasuries every year. Maybe they should stop. The only reason they're doing so is to prop up the euro and to keep the German 10-year Bund from breaking above 2.6%. Maybe he should call up his countrywoman, and I use that word loosely, Christine Lagarde, and say, stop buying U.S. treasuries. Why does he call up the Bank of England and say, stop buying U.S. treasuries, or the British Virgin Islands, or Ireland, or Canada, or all these other Eurocentric central banks that have been buying U.S. treasuries like they're going out of style since Powell started raising interest rates? You're doing so to you want the euro to maintain greater than parity to the dollar? Fine. Stop. Then you have to buy U.S. treasuries. If you want the euro to fall below parity, then stop buying U.S. treasuries, allow your bond yields to rise, and let the Germans deal with the problem. But the Germans won't do this because the Germans keep blackmailing everybody, saying, look, if you don't keep the euro at least reasonably strong, and we're not allowed to, and if we are not allowed to continue running a trade surplus against the rest of Europe internally, then we're out. Scholz the other day just is opening up another negotiation with Gazprom to negotiate a new gas supply treaty that goes around Ukraine, because the new one, because the one they signed in 2019 is about ready to expire. I forgot about this. I've been so far caught up in everything else, but that one's about to expire. We have a new one, and the Germans are doing exactly what the Germans always do, look for cheap gas to run their industry. And so then we get into, you know, what my Italian friends over at Mittelcino keep saying to me all the time, which is that Germany is on its own path and is going to make deals with Russia, and at the same time turn around and try and destroy and destroy Italy at the same time. I'm like, well, of course they still hate the Italians for being inept during World War II because they're Germans.
Right.
And it's nothing new. And I'm Italian, and like, you know, I don't like it's kind of genetic, like, to not like Germans, to be Italian when you're Italian. I kid, folks, mostly. I have many German people, but there is a certain cultural antipathy here, certainly amongst Italian elites versus German elites. Like going back to, I don't know, you know, the fall of the Roman Empire. Who were the barbarians at the gates? They were Germans. What are modern Germans like? There's a little animosity there, going back just a little bit of time. Just saying, you know. But I know we're not allowed to talk about these things on YouTube because, like, whoa, oh my God, racism. Like, over yourselves. This is Europe. This is European history. The whole idea of the EU is always a farce in the first place. These people hate each other. They always have. It's no different than every other place that has ever been really radically decentralized. And you've had enclaves of people separated by, you know, vast distances. I know, 30 or 40 miles. And in Europe, 50 miles or 100 miles is a long way. And in America, 100 years is a long time.
You actually, you know, again, because you can dig into the economics of this, and you probably heard of Russell Napier over in Scotland. He's one that I met him through Alex Craner also. And right. He basically takes that idea you talked about France and the not buying bonds. And he says, his theory is that Macron's putting up these snap elections to effectively, assuming he's ousted and this Le Pen takes over, that you know the ECB is not going to intervene on their behalf and allow rates to go up, with the theory that, and you actually brought this up too, from a sideways in this article, if I remember right, that, you know, okay, now the people have our choice. Are they going to? I think you said it. They're going to run back to the old regime, you know, help, or are they going to, you know, move ahead and go through the turmoil and sacrifice and challenges that have to happen? But he made an interesting point. He goes, it's not like, because he talks about financial repression and basically forcing private institutions to start buying, which could very well happen, and that, of course, has a whole impact on our economy here. But it supports this idea that you just said, and I kind of brought up, which is there's a fragmentation going on. You know, people think, I've brought this up before, I've had clients think, well, you know, the EU, how can you possibly say the EU is going to crack? And it's happening in real time. I guess, like I said, if you were to go back to your essay, I mean, you talked a lot about the separation of the first sign, I think, was ECB going one way, and Paul Powell's going another. Maybe let's just dive into that part of it, because that's been an ongoing theme for you for a while.
The basic argument and the basic genesis for the article was really quite simple. I've been waiting for this moment for about 3 years, where the ECB had to follow the Fed higher, because if they didn't, then bond spreads would become comical, even though they actually are. But we've gotten so used to the comical that we just don't think it's funny anymore. She has to keep raising rates alongside Powell, and do yield curve control at the same time, which she's been doing since the middle of 2022. Now, there was always going to come a point where Powell was going to hold the rates high enough, if he wasn't forced to pivot, which he's never been able to be forced to pivot, even though Janet Yellen has done everything imaginable trying to get him to pivot. And then eventually the situation would be to the point where Lagarde would either have to continue, quote unquote, fighting inflation, or save her banks. And the European banking system, I identified from the beginning, when Powell started raising rates, they would be the ones more vulnerable to rate hikes than American banks. Yeah, American banks are underwater, but so what? Did we ever go to the negative? Did we ever go negative? No. Were US 10 years trading at negative 0.6% at one point? Not the last time I checked, but damn well were German 10-year bonds trading that low. At $1.13 trillion worth of European sovereign debt was trading at a negative nominal yield. We never had anything like that. And yet somehow no one talks about it. And I'm crazy for thinking that the Fed is like trying to take out the Eurodollar system. Like, what else is SOFR if it's not? What is the end of LIBOR? Why get rid of LIBOR then? It's clear that what they wanted to do was get rid of LIBOR, move it to Euribor, have the Russians buy legitimize the euro through the massive energy trade and commodities trade with Europe, settle in a euro that would be a competitor to the US dollar in terms of trade settlement outside of the Eurozone, and then, flip the switch on us politically, turn us into a friggin' pariah state around the world, to get us into wars, put trannies in charge of the government, like the whole 9 yards, like everything. Have the mushroom spore fly in the White House, have the trannies run all the agencies. Chevron is never overturned. Like all of the things that have happened in the last couple of years, none of these things were supposed to have happened. And SOFR was never supposed to be on the books.
You got to read these essays because we're just gleaning over the top and hitting a few white caps on the water here. But can you explain for the person who just isn't familiar with LIBOR and SOFR, just kind of that? I mean, that to me is key. And you brought it up in our first conversation.
Yeah, no, LIBOR and SOFR, and I knew I was over the target the minute everybody started telling me that SOFR didn't matter 3 years ago. I'm like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Please tell me more. Please, I want to hear why SOFR, the domestic pricing mechanism covered by settled repo transactions in domestic markets in the United States, the most quote unquote powerful economy in the world, is not as important as LIBOR. Really? You want me to believe that? And it's now the law of the land in the US, and LIBOR isn't. Well, they never, like everything else, everybody's normalcy bias is, well, we've been using LIBOR forever. You've been using LIBOR since 1984. Get over yourselves. Like history didn't start in 1984 with LIBOR and the Chevron doctrine. Like, just like Ukrainian history didn't start in 2019 or whatever it is. Like they want us to believe. Like everybody's got this ridiculous and ahistorical perspective because we can only think of things within our lifetimes. Remember, before I give you that, I'm going to, and when I say that, and I'm going to preface this by saying this, here's another lesson for you. You watch the original Star Wars today, and you get to that moment when one of the generals turns to Vader and says, "Your sad devotion to that ancient religion." That feels really out of date now because we have the prequel stories, right? Which set that up 20 years ago. That was the Jedi were in charge of peace in the galaxy 20 years ago. But somehow that's the ancient past. Okay? We all do this, especially in a world today where we're told whatever happened a week ago is no longer important. The Overton window is shifted. We're now focused on the shiny over there. No one has a long-term perspective on things because we all have to live in the moment. Why? Because every moment is fraught with danger, and we're all in constant fight or flight mode. Yeah. And none of us are actually rationally sitting back with a stogie and and just going, "Hey, man, what happened last month? Just think about what happened." No, they're not doing that. So say that. So now, what is SOFR? What is LIBOR? SOFR is the secured overnight financing rate. It is a market-driven debt indexing rate of the cost of dollars that within the US financial system. That's what it is. It's a secured financing rate, meaning every transaction that transmits through, that's quoted through SOFR is based on real world secured transactions where somebody bought dollars and pledged the security, and they pledged it at that interest rate, right? What is LIBOR? LIBOR was the London Interbank Offer Rate. That was a way to price euro dollars, offshore dollars. It's what it was. LIBOR existed because we had all trillions of these dollars that we sent out during the Marshall Plan and the Cold War, and sitting in people's bank accounts, and they needed a way to figure out how to, write debt contracts. So, I have a whole bunch of, I'm a Greek shipping tycoon. I've got $5 billion, dollars, not euros, not drachma, dollars sitting in a bank account. And I'm like, I want to loan this out to some guy wants to start a business, wants to start a new yogurt business in Athens. Well, okay, I don't know what do I price that loan at? Eventually LIBOR is the thing we use. Now, LIBOR by 1984, once the British Banking Association takes it over, becomes the law of the land becomes the de facto standard for the entirety of the dollar pricing system the world over.
And how the hell does that happen?
Because it's easy. Because we didn't have an alternative.
Yeah.
And because the British are evil, period. Full stop, period, paragraph, interpret that as you wish. What does that do? Well, it undergirds the argument that Jeff Snyder, formerly of Alhambra Partners, used to make all the time. The Fed's not in charge of its own monetary policy. Agreed, Jeff. Yeah. And when I said, hey, man, SOFR, law of the land, he said, SOFR doesn't matter. I'm like, oh, that's nice. And then SOFR becomes the law of the land. Then SOFR futures trading starts on the COMEX. Then within 9 months of that, by the end of 2022, volume on the SOFR 3-month SOFR futures contract on the COMEX is 10 times that of the Eurodollar futures market on the COMEX. The deuce, you say. Kind of important. By June of 2023 or April of 2023, the Eurodollar contract at the COMEX, done. Finished, finito, gone. Doesn't exist anymore. Oh, really? SOFR doesn't matter. Pull my other leg, it plays jingle bells. Like, no, it does matter. It clearly matters because you're literally trying to say to me that the world's most powerful central bank isn't the world's most powerful central bank in one breath. And on the other breath, you want to say that it's the most powerful central bank in the world. Everybody should watch the Fed. Well, yeah, everybody should watch the Fed when you want everybody to watch the Fed, when you want the Fed to do what you want it to do. When it stops doing what you want it to do, now the Fed is evil. And now frankly, every adolescent Ron Paul style libertarian is still screaming to end the Fed. I'm like, not right now, because the Fed is literally gaining control over its own monetary policy, and therefore our fiscal policy, our political system, and everything else. None of the things that have happened during the Biden administration would have occurred had we not moved to SOFR, implemented it, made it stick, and the Fed been able to keep interest rates at 5.5%. What we have found over these last 2.5 years is that the United States economy is a hell of a lot more resilient than people gave it credit for. And you want to know why? Because before we weren't able to be resilient because we were having to be the central bank and the piggy bank of the world. The Treasury sent and the Fed sent dollars out and priced them, underpriced them, and then we had to pay the friggin' tax bill to subsidize everybody else's, social welfare systems and their yachts and their this and all of their grand plans to subvert our economy. And then what did they do with that money to protect themselves? The Soroses, all of these evil freaking oligarchs. What did they do? They recycled some of those dollars back into our banks to buy our politicians and our freaking judges and our DAs and everybody else and our politicians. What, are you out of your mind? You didn't think they were going to do that? It makes perfect sense for them to do that. They were protecting their investment.
A few years ago, this would have sounded completely, absurd.
Insane.
But the reality of it is you look, no, I know, but then you look at what's going on and it's the only logical explanation. I mean, that's it. It's like, you look at it the way Trump's been, like the witch hunt, that's kind of a overused term, but I mean, this constant, we're even, liberal judges, people that hate him have said these cases in New York are ridiculous. I mean, this isn't a case. And so, and the world's getting exposed to this. And then you see, debate with Biden and just all, and it's like, it's how, there's no other explanation than other what you just said. And it feels so, because I want my goal here, because I could talk to you for a couple hours. I know you got a life, but I wanted to whet people's appetites and get them to really dig into your work and find you on Patreon. But maybe the last part here is, where are we, getting back to the front end of the Shadowfist, where are we in your estimation?
With Chevron, with the Trump versus the administrative state, with Jarkesy. If everybody's talking about friggin' Chevron, dude, you got to talk about the Jarkesy case against the SEC, because that means that we just had the resumption of trial by jury. That means no longer can the SEC turn around to fine you again, call you a fraud, drag your name through the mud like they did with this guy, set up a Star Chamber administrative court to then convict you in their administrative court, like we're fucking France, for Christ's sake. Like, when did administrative courts become a thing in the United States? Last I checked, we're under English common law, not French administrative law. And maybe there's some gray area there that I don't, some legal gray area there that I'm not hip to, but that's fine. Like, turning the entire country into the state of Louisiana, not a good idea. Just as to remind everybody that we do have federalism, some vestiges of federalism in the United States, because Louisiana is governed under French law. It's different than the rest of the country. How does that happen? Because the Jarkesy case, basically, what happened to that guy? The SEC accused him of fraud, dragged his name through the mud, debanked him, destroyed him, and then took him to administrative court, issued fines against him that he couldn't do anything about. And the Supreme Court came back and said, oh, by the way, no, he is deserving of a trial by jury against these accusations under he filed a Seventh Amendment appeal, or an Article 7, or Seventh Amendment appeal. That's what he did. It was the Seventh Amendment, like trial by jury. Like, look, I deserve this. How can this doesn't make any sense? And then between Jarkesy and Chevron together, the administrative state's been destroyed. Joe Biden, the Democrats are in the process of trying to push us past the question of how did everybody in the cabinet not inform the public, as is their duty, that the president is senile, infirm, and incapable of discharging his duties as president of the United States and should have been 25th Amendmented out 2 years ago? Why is no one asking that question? Why are they all of a sudden moving us to directly who's going to be Biden's replacement? Because that's what they want us to do. Because what they don't want us to do is to ask that question, because we ask that question, the entirety of the cabinet goes to jail for either dereliction of duty or treason or anything, conspiracy, anything. Pick a statute, resurrect Rudy Giuliani. I think we can get a RICO case out of this one. We'll get Mr. RICO on the clock, for Christ's sake. Like, it's ridiculous. It's patently ridiculous. Like, so they're already trying to absolve all these people of blame. And that is the question we should be continuing to ask. That's what we should continue to not allow them to shift the Overton window away from. If you do that, Trump's going to win in the fall. There's no way to really stop him at this point. You can't be, unless they're going to They're going to steal the election so bad that they force a civil war. That's their move. And you know what we can say to that? No. California, you don't get to leave if Trump wins. New York, you don't get to leave. We fought the Civil War the first time to say you don't get a chance to leave. I hate to sound like a fascist here, even though I'm supposed to be a libertarian, but like, the reality is you don't get to leave. And the reason you don't get to leave is because we have other things that need to be fixed first before you can leave. And most importantly is that we cannot allow the European Union to last as under its current situation until they are broken. Then we can break up. We can break up after they break up. We're going to break up eventually. This country is not going to last, but it can survive. Because if you break the country up, if everybody's so demoralized and so ashamed of America and so ashamed of themselves that let's just like break it up. Okay, fine. Who pays for that $34 trillion worth of debt? What happens to the bond market? Where does the capital flow? You want that capital to leave? If you want that, guess what's going to happen, folks? That money is going to flee the chaos that ensues. You know where it's going to go? Right back from where it came from. It's going to go to prop up the sclerotic, failing, technocratic monstrosity that should have been aborted in its crib, the European Union, and give all of these rat sons of bitches away off the reservation. No, they can collapse first. Then we can decide what we're going to do with our bills. Let's, as Jordan Peterson said, fix your house first, then deal with everyone else. Yeah. And we, by bringing the money back on shore, by leaving interest rates higher, we make ourselves more attractive to investment. Chevron changes the investment playing field. So does Jarkesy. So does Trump versus all of these Supreme Court cases all say the same thing. America is coming back and being open for business again. And you don't have to worry about us stealing your capital. Why do you think they were desperately trying to get the Americans to make the terrible choice to seize Russia's foreign exchange reserves? Again, another moment of how can we undermine the United States? How can we undermine law? How can we undermine contract law? How can we undermine everything? These people are communists and they're vandals and they're evil. Okay. And if you don't like any of those terms, then consider them locusts.
That's biblical.
Easy.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm not going to go into eschatology this morning. That'll be for my next talk with my friend Faisal.
Oh my gosh. I appreciate what you've brought, the view you bring, because it's a key. One of the things I've learned in the last 4 years as my eyes have opened pretty much since the COVID
Sure.
is, you get information overload on all these so-called, truthers and this and that and whatever. And then as time goes on, you realize it's just only, you've really got to limit your intake, so to speak, your input to a few different voices that you then can combine. And I could go on because some of the things you're saying start to bring more questions, in terms of what Japan's
Sure.
doing. And it's great because that's the whole problem. You brought up in your essay about how we've been distracted, with things, I can't remember the wording, but it was really well written that, we're all off over here. Our morals have been compromised. We're all on our phones, whatever we've been distracted, like you said, from what's going on. And now, your point is really good because that's where my mind goes. As soon as, there's an agenda or, well, okay, who's the replacement? My mind is exactly where you said. I start saying, well, what are we trying to skip over here?
Right.
More and more people are starting to go that direction with this stuff. And that's a positive. I mean,
100%, you're absolutely right. And I'll be honest with you, Dexter and I had long strategy sessions about what our role actually is. It's not all the details that I threw out to you this morning. None of that. The high level strategy, the ethos of what Gold, Goats, and Guns is to teach people how to interpret what you're seeing, to teach you again how to think about how the information is being presented to you. You can learn how to do this by watching movies and ask yourself, why did he put the camera there? Why did the editor cut from this shot to this shot? Why? When you put together the totality of both of our experiences as men, mine at the gaming table, his in the world of history, and he has done some film editing in his life. When you put all those things together, you realize that it's a cross section of skills, and it's just a reminder that with good foundational principles of how to look at the world, then you can apply that to as many idioms as possible. And then everything, all you see are the primitives. It doesn't matter what the details are. You see the primitive building blocks, and then you go, oh, well, that's what this clearly that is. And then you can go, okay, well, why is that newspaper saying that? Well, it's because they work for the CIA. They just keep a database in your head. Who works for the CIA? Which ones are the house organs of the CIA? The Brits, the GOP, this one, that one. That's what we do. And then we just go, okay. And then you attenuate, and then you use that as your first order approximation to try and build a model of what's going on. And then you look for discordant information from your normal model. And if you do that, and you don't, and this is the thing, as scientists, there's one last thing to point out, especially as scientists, one of the things that is dangerous and pernicious about the scientific methodology is that you get all this data and you're going to have a spread on that data, and there's going to be outliers, and you have to be very judicious and careful statistically about what you consider an outlier and what you don't consider an outlier. We're trained to get rid of outliers, to not look at the outliers, when it's what we should be doing is going, this is what we think we know, and we should be looking for the outliers that poke holes in our arguments. Now, I'm not saying that that's the way you should do, plant or soil research or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But it's very important as sociologists, we don't apply, because because history is a sociological problem. Politics is a sociological problem. It's not a hard science problem. Okay. It's not chemistry, folks. Okay. Metaphors may work, but only in a very limited sense. But we're doing something completely different. We should be looking at what's normal behavior and then looking for the outliers, because the outliers are going to be the catalyst for change. They're going to be the things that are your leading indicators, especially as market forces, especially as market players. You're looking for those outliers that are going to be the catalyst for a major change that no one's looking at. And that's the kind of the way we operate. That's what we keep trying to teach people. That's our mission. It's a very important thing to understand that, and it's not that we're right about everything, or even we're right about anything. Just that if you apply that, if you have that framework in your head, going right back to why I had to write 3 versions of last month's issue of Article 1, why I had to write 3 versions of these past 2 essays, which I'd never had to do before. But because I was venturing into history, I had to get my framework correct in order to make the thing work, and not talk in definitive terms, but talk in, kind of Bayesian statistics terms and probabilities and whatnot. And so it's very important that you do that. And what I see over and over and over again, as I do more of these interviews and get to chat with different people, is that is really taking hold. That basic framework. I see it within our community on our private Slack server. I see it in the comments to the articles that I post, to the videos and the comments I post within the private messages I get on Twitter, the responses to my Twitter feed, everything. I'm seeing that groundswell of that intellectual awakening, which is exactly what we want to have. Because if we can train the next generation to think critically that way, we all lament the loss of critical thinking and everything else. It's just as far as I'm concerned, a rotten GOP talking point to make more, to get more donor dollars. To do it right is real, that's what's moved. That's what moves the needle. That's what's very hard for them to identify. That's why you can have outsized results like the first round of the French elections.
Right.
But they were able to ring fence things yesterday, for example, in UK. Okay. Then what does that say about the British people? It says they're not quite where the French are yet, but that makes sense.
Tom, I appreciate it. Anybody who, like I said, I've mentioned a few times, but Tom Luongo on Patreon, and I just want to add one last thing to your point, because one of the filters I've used is in trying to decide where I'm going to follow information is where people's motives are, and the fact that you're not just throwing stuff out, but really concerned about the product, so to speak, and the content, and true to a purpose. The money always follows, that's it. And people are going to be drawn to truth. And that's been a filter. We don't pop in with, gold commercials in the middle of this. To me, it's just a way to get your voice out and others to help get people, like you said, to think and open their minds. So I just appreciate the time. I think after the 4th of July, it's a good day to have an interview. And I just want to thank you for coming back on UpThinking Finance.
Thank you, Emerson. And as always, I'm happy to do so.
Awesome. Thank you.
Emerson Fersch is a registered representative with and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, SIPC. Advisor services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from Capital Investment Advisors. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and the companies they represent are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Capital Investment Advisors. Individual tax and legal matters should be discussed with your tax or legal expert. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. There is no assurance that the techniques and strategies discussed are suitable for all investors or will yield positive outcomes. The purchase of certain securities may be required to affect some of the strategies. Investing involves risks, including possible loss of principal.